I'm delighted to be joined by Senator Ron Johnson. He is going to be discussing his outlook on American manufacturing and trade. But first, I wanted to discuss some of the spicy comments you've been making over the last 24 hours on the spending and tax cut negotiations. You've called for a return to pre-pandemic spending levels. Who are you talking to as you make your case? I mean, I know you had an op-ed, but are you talking to the White House, to Leader Thune, and what are you hearing back from them?
So if you call them spicy comments, I would just call them the truth. No, I'm talking to all of them, and I've talked to all of them. And they're well aware of my position. My first column on this ran in the Wall Street Journal on January 1st or 2nd. And this was over the Christmas holiday where I'm kind of going, okay, how can we fix this? And I hit on the idea, let me go back to prior years' total outlays and increase them by population growth and inflation. So I had to pick which year. So I went back to Clinton in 1998, where we actually had a surplus for the first time since 1969. And then Obama 2014, 10 years ago, and then Trump in 2019. And I left Social Security, Medicare, and interest alone. Spend at 2025 levels. But all those other outlays, the actual outlays, and by the way, I don't think we were spending too little in 1998 or 2014 or 2019, increase them by a reasonable control, population growth, inflation, you'd end up with total expenditures of $5.5 to $6.5 trillion. We're spending $7 trillion this year, probably north of that. We went from $4.4 trillion in 2019 prior to the pandemic up to $7 trillion. That's about a 58% increase, where our population is growing less than 3%. Again, I know we've had Biden inflation, but even at that high level, you still end up with a baseline budget of somewhere between 5.5 to 6.5 trillion. Now the House, and the Senate, in their budget resolutions, they all told us, well, this is just the minimum amount we're going to save. But they're having a hard time finding 1.5 trillion. Sounds like a lot. Over 10 years, that's 150 billion. Which, by the way, is about when you add in the additional spending on border security and defense, we're going to be cutting less than 1.3% of the $89.3 trillion we'll spend over the next 10 years. We will actually increase the deficit. So if you take a look at my bottom lines of budget reconciliation, the first principle, when we're $37 trillion in debt, according to CBO, will be about $59 to $60 trillion in 2035. My first principle would be, let's bend that curve down. Let's make sure that whatever we do, we don't increase the deficit. But right now, I think we're on track to increase the deficit.
But are they listening to you? Like, do you feel like they're potentially going to
what's
accommodate you?
They all agree with me. They say, well, I agree with what you're saying, but that ship has sailed. What I reply, we'll call it back to port. Because I think that other ship with the big, beautiful bill, I think that's the Titanic. I think that's going down because I think I have enough colleagues in the Senate that this has resonated with that are saying, yeah, we've got to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level spending. But I always add this, plus a process to achieve it and maintain it. We've never had a process in America to control federal government spending. We don't have a balanced budget requirement. The Budget Act didn't do it. By the way, I didn't realize this. The appropriation committees were initially set up to control spending. The authorizing committees were the big spenders, so they established appropriation committees to control them. Well, how long did that last? Maybe half, I don't know. It didn't work, okay? But Budget Act didn't work, Simpson-Bowles didn't work, the Budget Control Act didn't work. So what I'm suggesting is, take a look at what we're seeing with Elon Musk and Doge. They're showing us how to do it. Get in there, you have to look at contract by contract. I'm suggesting a line-by-line budget review panel. Senators, House members, OMB, sitting down going line by line, again, comparing spending to those prior year expenditures, plussed up for inflation population, and then ask the question, well, why are you spending more than that? Justify it. Why are you spending anything on this? And I just have to believe when you're dealing with a budget that went from $4,400 billion a year to $7,000 billion. I know we're getting immune from the enormity of what we're talking about here, but $7,000 billion, I have to believe, just based on what we've seen with Doge, you go through that line by line and really do a forensic audit and analysis of that, you literally could cut hundreds of billions of dollars, and nobody, other than the ones that are sucking down that waste, fraud, and abuse, are going to know. The American public wouldn't even notice it. And I've proven that too, based on, I've printed out the budgets, thousands of lines worth based on that control. And, I've shown my colleagues, you wouldn't even have to touch Medicaid, and you can still save hundreds of billions of dollars in both other mandatory and discretionary spending and achieve far more savings than what we're doing. You do it a couple $100 million at a time, line by line, but you have to have the time, you have to be willing to do the work, and nobody's willing to do the work. We got to rush this thing through. Pass one big beautiful bill, which the Wall Street Journal editors titled that "The Ugly Truth About One Big Beautiful Bill." And the ugly truth is, we'll actually increase the deficit. We're not significantly cutting spending. We're not, and we're certainly not returning to a reasonable pre-pandemic level. Now, one thing I laid out in my column to show that it's possible: prior to World War II, the federal government spending was 11.7% of GDP. Obviously, you ramp it up with all the military spending. We hit 41% in the height of the war. But by 1948, because we had the greatest generation, we had responsible people in government, they realized, well, I know we've ratcheted up government to that level, but we've got to return to a pre-war level. By 1948, we were down to 11.4% spending of GDP. So it's possible. And so there's different ways of coming up with about $6.5 trillion. One of them is just take a look at the percentage of GDP we spent in 2019, 20.6%. Apply that to the projected GDP for 2026, you'd end up with about $6.5 trillion. So I've come up with $6.5 trillion, a couple different methods. It's a reasonable figure. You can do it, again, line by line, and I don't think anybody would even notice.
So you said that you thought that the big beautiful bill is going down, is what you said. We are running up on the debt ceiling. We've actually already run up on the debt ceiling, and we're going to reach the X date at some point in the next few months here. How do you propose handling that?
Well, again, we already have a Senate budget resolution that was going to be a multi-step process. The first step would have been just pass and provide President Trump the funding to secure the border and do what he needs to do in terms of deportation. The price for that was plus and up defense, fine. But in that budget resolution, we also required to pay for that over 4 years, $85 billion a year times 10, that's $850 billion of spending reduction, which is more than half of the big beautiful bill. So we should already have that done and banked.
Would you just do a clean increase?
So we can still do that. I'm encouraging Senate leadership, just bring up that bill, let's pass our own reconciliation bill. Let's at least have that passed so that if and when the big beautiful bill fails, we can immediately pivot to that. Second step, I've always suggested a three-step process. Second step would just extend the current tax law. And I justify that by saying if we would have been smart enough, and we weren't in 2017, that was a blunder, allowing, passing a tax bill that parts of it automatically expire. That wasn't smart, okay?
But you have to pay for it otherwise.
Fortunately, we had Chairman Crapo who came up with the concept, he and his staff, well, let's treat revenue the same way we treat spending. If there's a spending program that ends, we don't score that if we continue. We score that based on current policy. So we're just doing that with revenue. So by scoring current policy, if you just extend current tax law, make no changes, just extend that, there's no score. So I would just do that, and what that would accomplish is it takes an automatic massive tax increase off the table for every American. Unlike the lies the Democrats say, virtually every American that paid tax in 2017, 2018 got a tax cut. So now they get a tax increase. I want to prevent that. So the second step would just be extend current tax law. In that process, you probably need to increase the debt ceiling. I would increase it by amount to give us enough time to do the third or fourth reconciliation for the fiscal 2026 budget, where we really can get down to hopefully simplifying and rationalizing our tax code and having the time to go line by line and exposing all the waste, fraud, and abuse. Take a look at all these spending categories that have increased higher than the rates of inflation, population growth. When you're $37 trillion in debt, there's no room, there's no justification for spending above and beyond what you were spending 1 year plus inflation plus population growth. There's no justification for it. Force these agencies to justify it. I just have to believe that's the only process that will control spending, and we have to maintain that process. We can't just keep doing the things we do, which is kind of take a look, well, this is what we spent last year. What do we bump it up by? 2%, 3%? Okay, we'll compromise 2.5%, and we just continue down this road of.
But would you support a clean, just a debt ceiling increase, not tied to anything else?
When it comes right down to it, probably, yeah. Again, but not for long. I mean, again, I don't mind 2 yards and a cloud of dust here. Now, if you can do it through budget reconciliation, it has to be a dollar amount, which I think is good. I certainly did not like the way they would just suspend it. And that's what we've done. Again, that's how we've allowed this to get so completely out of control. The only leverage we have, and I know President Trump hates it, but I love it, because it's the only control we have over spending, is that debt ceiling. So I want to use that leverage. I want to use that control because nothing else has worked.
Do you buy tariff revenue as a pay for, even though it's not through the congressional process?
No, listen, I want to keep revenue and spending completely separate. When you start mixing them, you're going to keep spending at higher levels and just say, well, we're reducing the deficit because we have this new revenue. I don't mind increasing revenue by growing the economy. That's the good way. I don't want to do it by increasing taxes, and tariffs are a tax. Somebody's going to pay them, either the foreign country, the foreign company, or American consumers. Somebody pays that. I don't want to fund big government. Again, I think Trump was primarily elected to defeat the deep state. You don't defeat the deep state by continuing to fund it at the current levels. The extraordinary higher levels than it was just before he left office in 2019. So I'm not particularly interested in funding that. I want to reduce spending. So I am focusing on spending. And I refer your audience, I've got a great video. My staff did a great job putting clips together. I asked them to get the president, vice president, all our leaders making the comment that we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. So it's on top of my X page, and runs about 1:30, and you just see all the Republican leaders saying, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem, and I asked the question at the end, so are we willing to fix it? And right now it doesn't appear like they are.
So I do want to talk about trade before we run out of time. You have talked about how you hope that President Trump will be successful in the long term. You said that on Meet the Press last week. Senator Wyden said this morning that he thought that we've gotten virtually nothing so far. So my question for you is, what does success actually look like? What is the president trying to do? What should the president actually be trying to do with these tariffs?
Well, first of all, there's been all kinds of success. And I can't tell you how pleased I am that President Trump is acting boldly, swiftly, decisively. We've secured the border. Remember, we said, oh, Congress has to act. No, we just need a new president. We've secured the border. We are deporting the criminals, the members of dangerous gangs, the human sex and drug traffickers. I mean, that's what the American people elected him to do, and he's doing it. I just heard a segment of his speech in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's brilliant. I really do. I mean, I cannot just listen to it. I have to go listen to the whole thing, but he's just kind of resetting exactly how America ought to approach the world, not impose our values on everybody, respect people's sovereignty, help them achieve peace and stability. Try and do that through economic development. Again, I've always thought that President Trump was probably the president in my lifetime that was the least likely to get us into war and probably the most likely to get us out of them, which is not easy to do. He's finding that out. But he's dedicated to peace, and I think that's a very good thing for a president. So the fact that he's pretty well stamping out, not only out of these institutions, but I think culturally, the whole wokeism, DEI, so that we actually are a colorblind society. We treat people equally. It's called about equal opportunity. I think he's made tremendous strides in such a short period of time.
But what about on trade?
On trade, I hope he achieves what I think is truly his objective, which is free and fair trade. I would like a zero tariff world. But again, I also understand that there are countries that they want to provide for them. They want to be able to grow their own food. In order to do that, I mean, for example, we could probably wipe out Canada's dairy industry, but they want to have dairy cows, so they put some protectionist measures. They have supply management. I understand that, so it makes trade negotiations pretty difficult. But from my standpoint, I think you need to focus on the abuse of China. I think that is the primary problem, and it's a very legitimate concern that we do not produce certain products in America, and we need to figure out how to bring those back. I don't want to do corporate welfare. I don't think the CHIP Act worked particularly well. I think when we spend money, we waste it. I'd much rather just say, well, if you come back and manufacture that, we're not going to tax it for fill in the blanks. Talk to the financial people. So, what kind of tax holiday do you need to incentivize you to bring that manufacturing, whether it's for, and by the way, also permitting. We're vulnerable in pharmaceuticals. Well, refining pharmaceutical precursor chemicals, it needs permitting. So we need to streamline that. But we need to economically incentivize people to bring that stuff back. And best way I do it is just don't tax it. We're not getting the tax revenue anyway from manufacturers overseas, so it doesn't cost us anything, but it attracts that, and then eventually we'll get the revenue from that when we start taxing it. So again, there's so many common sense solutions here that we just never employ, which drives me nuts, which is one of the reasons I wanted a multi-step process. So when we get to the really complexity of a big, beautiful bill, we have time to discuss each and every element. We can debate it, and we can craft something that is much simpler, much more rational, and stops funding the deep state, and we return to a pre-pandemic level spending. That's going to take time, obviously, because here we are. We've taken too much time already on some of the priorities we agree on, which is why a multi-step approach was always the better approach. And I'm just trying to convince our leadership, the sooner you admit that mistake, I'm sorry, Mr. President, the sooner you admit that mistake, that one big beautiful bill was too complex and not going to accomplish the objectives we should have had going in, which is lower spending. Again, that's the problem, not a revenue, it's a spending problem, the better off we'll be. So again, I'm urging them, to urge them in my column, reconsider your approach. Let's move to the multi-step process strategy right off the bat, right now, and let's move forward.
Do you worry if the tariffs remain in place that Republicans will suffer in the midterms?
I'm worried about their impact on the economy. President Trump is announcing, I think it's up to $10 trillion in investment commitment. That's great. We have to realize that, just like we have to realize and codify what DOGE is exposing in terms of expenditures. But what I'm hearing from Wisconsin businesses, manufacturers, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Business Roundtable is, right now investment is on hold. Again, I come from the private sector. You want as much certainty and stability, which is why if you pass a tax reform, you don't want to have it automatically expire. I guess that's certain, but what you want is you want to create a simple and rational tax system and let people believe it's going to be long-lasting. If it is simple, if it is rational, it will be. The last thing you want is create fiscal cliffs that just create all kinds of uncertainty. And the whole tariff, the whole trade war has injected an enormous amount of uncertainty and instability. We got to calm that down. One of the reasons that markets have reacted positively is President Trump has backed away. He's given 90-day moratoriums. I hope they conclude these trade deals so we can return certainty. But again, one of the reasons I would just, again, one sentence bill, just extend current tax law. As awful as I think it is, take an automatic tax cut off the table. That would bring back a lot of certainty back to the economy, stability, which I think would prompt investment as well. So right now, it's the thing that am worried most about in terms of tariffs, as well as the big, beautiful bill. What we're doing is, it isn't providing the certainty and stability that business leaders need if they're going to invest their capital and risk it.
Do you think that there are particular industries that are ripe for reshoring in a way that maybe others aren't?
Well, again, that's why I asked Trade Representative Greer in the Finance Committee, give me the list. Now, I've ticked off, pharmaceuticals. I found that out. I didn't realize it really till I held a hearing right as we're entering COVID in February 2020. We don't make the precursor chemicals. We don't supply the active pharmaceutical ingredients to most of the drugs in America. We have enormous drug shortages of just basic things like heparin. That's just an ongoing problem. So we've got a real issue in terms of drug supply. That's a vulnerability. Obviously, high-end semiconductors. When you take a look at the world we live in today, you need the most advanced high-end semiconductors. You need a secure source supply.
Was the CHIPS Act?
In the island nation of Taiwan, threatened by China all the time, that's a highly insecure source. Now, by the way, I primarily blame American businesses for being short-sighted. I'm in manufacturing. I produce plastic material for medical device packaging. When they moved overseas, we were always pressured to move our supply, our manufacturing next to them because they realized they need a secure source supply. So I really blame the users of high-end semiconductors that they've allowed themselves to be so vulnerable to supply dislocations of all this, all the stuff they have to import. So
should we keep the CHIPS Act funding?
Again, I haven't done I have voted against that. Again, I don't like economic engineering through spending. I think if you have a well-defined idea of what we need to bring back, the approach there is just don't tax it for a while. to incentivize it coming back. Again, it costs you nothing. It's being manufactured somewhere else. They're paying taxes to some other jurisdiction. They're not paying taxes here, so all we do is we say, okay, you're not going to be taxed. Now, that alone creates problems with trade deals. That's what I say. Trade and this is an incredibly complex issue here. But I think that'd just be sort of table stakes going to trade negotiations. Listen, we need to bring these things back, and I know you look at that as protectionism. This is vital to national security. We're going to track these by not taxing them for X number of years, but then after 5 years, 10 years, whatever it takes, they'll be on a level playing field. But we have to bring these things back.
We're out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, what do you think it would take for Congress to actually push back on Trump's tariffs, to actually pull back some of the authority that he currently has?
Well, first of all, we have to see how this plays out. I mean, I don't want to undermine whatever his negotiating strategy he has. I mean, I don't know what it is. One thing about Trump is he wants to be, and he is unpredictable, okay? My role has been just to make sure that his administration, they've been very accessible. They've been very open to hearing the case studies. Well, this is a business that's going to go out of business. This is a business that's going to be having to lay off a bunch of people. So they are well aware of that, which is, I think, one of the reasons, among many, that he pushed people. He kind of threw them all off guard, which is kind of his negotiating style. And now, hopefully, people are coming to the table. They do want to negotiate something. They do realize they are not engaged in fair trade with America, and he's going to insist on it. So it was a very bold, pretty high risk.
So it depends on how long this lasts.
So again, I have to see how this plays out. But again, I keep why am I talking so bluntly here is, I want him to hear this. I want his administration to see this too. Is he only has so much time. But again, I don't want to undermine his strategy because unlike others who are hoping he fails, I hope he succeeds. I hope he succeeds spectacularly. I hope all my concerns are alleviated. But again, so that's why my primary focus is spending. I mean, he'll take care of trade. I can't really do much about that right now. Really, I mean, it's nothing that we do. We can poke a stick in his eye. That just undermines him. I don't want to undermine his negotiating strategy, but we can focus on the thing we can do, which is we need to reduce spending to a reasonable pre-pandemic level, and we're not doing that.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Senator. I really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to our sponsor, AEM, and thank you all for attending today.